Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast, She Said What, where the four of us sit down and have unfiltered conversations about the modern landscape as women. In today's episode, though, we're joined by a fifth member, Armaan Bamzai, who is the co founder of PaperPlanes Bangalore, which has now started many other offshoots, including in Nagpur, Chennai, and other places across India. The initiative essentially deals with mental health issues and trying to reduce the stigma around mental health in India, specifically through really fun workshops, meetings, and their Instagram pages. I think before we get into the episode, though, I'm just going to hand it over to Armaan just to introduce himself and his project a little bit, just so you guys can get to know him a bit better.
So thank you for that really kind introduction. It was really nice of you, and it sounded really fancy when you said it. I didn't even realize how much we did. Like you said, the idea is to reduce stigma, and the main way that we do it is through creative expression. So this is like writing, art, music, dance, all that fun stuff, and we basically have a creative platform. So I think it's very similar to what you guys are aiming to do, which is like creating an open dialogue, which is why I'm really excited to be with you today.
All right, that's super fun. I'm really, really proud of the work you're doing because I've personally known you for a really long time. And I just want to say I'm really, really proud of the work that you're doing. And I honestly think it's such a cool approach. I know that in today's generation, especially with like students like us who go like international schools and everything, it's kind of sad, but a lot of people are starting like just projects for college. But I genuinely see the passion translating into you guys' work. That's why I really, really appreciate it. One question I do want to ask you though is like in this entire experience of like starting paper planes and all of this, first of all, you guys have grown to such a large scale, but what is like one of the biggest like setbacks or obstacles that you found in this entire journey of growth?
I guess ironically, one of the obstacles is one that there's no way that we can solve right now, which is our age. Like being high school students, nobody's taking us seriously when we go to them to ask for help or to ask for funds or to ask for support. People are like, "Oh, but why should we support you as like a high school student or an organization? You're probably just doing this for college. I don't even want to be part of this." So there's always that when we go to like big name sponsors and things like that. So that's a setback that we face, but we've easily managed to overcome it because we went to startups, we recruited new members, and they've been spreading the word for us. So that's a setback that we really can't solve right now until a few years later when we're nice and in our 20s. But yeah, that's something that we faced.
Yeah, I think like to, as you said, to prove what you're doing is legitimate, it takes like a lot of planning and stuff. So I wanted to ask you on a personal level, like this whole process of opening up and starting paper planes and speaking about mental health on like such a large platform, has it kind of been therapeutical for you in a way, and for your friends, for all of you?
Yeah, we've talked about this a bit on our Instagram group. We've talked about this, and we've said it kind of feels really cathartic to hear everyone's stories, and it feels there's a sense of togetherness, there's a sense of empathy because we're connecting with people on such a personal and real level because mental health is the most vulnerable thing that we can express. So when people tell us about their mental health, that's like them opening up, and that's really, really hard to do. So people opening up to us makes us more willing to open up to others, and that's been super cathartic for us.
Please stalking you guys' Instagram page and stuff. I saw that you guys had an event called Alone Together, and you've had a lot of other events where you invite people to come in. What was the aim of the events? Do you guys talk about mental issues? I think what you guys do, and kind of you're creating community, right? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure, yeah. So you pointed out the event that we had, which is Alone Together. And basically, it's about being separate from each other, like during the quarantine, but still being together in the sense of being able to talk, being able to be open, being able to have a dialogue without physically being next to each other in the era of social distancing. So in our events, what we normally do is this idea of uh, there's a twofold approach. So first, we have people presenting their creative work. We invite poets and artists and musicians to just come and perform a little bit. And then in the second half of the event, we have a psychiatrist who gives a short talk on mental health, answers a few questions, and because we're teenagers at the end of the day, we're not qualified to give advice. So our priority is making sure that we have someone qualified on board who can give that advice and who can be that shoulder to cry on that can also give you some ideas to work on or give something that you can improve yourself with.
Another thing that I wanted to ask you is that during like quarantine and during lockdown, because like you said, everyone's super alone and there's obviously like feelings that we have time and space for that don't usually creep in when we're around people, because now I think we have to spend a lot more time with ourselves. What are things that you've been incorporating into your daily life that kind of help you maintain a more stable, a better mental health status? Like, how do you cope with any negative feelings during this time, especially?
I think right now the most important thing and the only thing we can do is spend time with our parents or the people who we're in immediate quarantine with, because those are our inner circle. Those are the people that we can spend time with safely. So the idea is to find something fun to do something different every day. So my parents have this huge stack of board games. We just go through them every week. We do Ludo, Monopoly, all that fun stuff. And the idea of doing something different is that it makes you feel less bored. It makes the time less monotonous, and it also helps you bond without having to like talk about very serious stuff, because it's tough to immediately open up to your family when that's not something you've been doing. And instead, it's like baby steps. So that's one way that I've been dealing with quarantine, is spending time with my family and doing something that puts a smile on my face every day.
I think that's really, really cool and that's really important. And I really like hearing things like this because for me personally, it's like the complete opposite, because I've never really been that like close to my family per se. So like we don't really like sit and play like board games all the time and things like that. But I do think it is like especially really important to just have that little bit of human interaction with the people you're quarantined with, if you are quarantined with anybody. And I think you're doing a really good job at that. So good job. But one of the questions I have is that right now with your entire initiative and everything, especially after this entire pandemic is broke out and all of that, do you think it's been easier or harder, if you can like underline that? Like, do you think it was easier or harder for your project to operate under the current like circumstances?
It's a little tough to say yes or no to was it easy or was it hard. There's no, because our audience has grown a lot during quarantine, because mental health has become way more important and people are finally considering it at equal weightage to physical health, which should be happening more often. So in that sense, it's become easier because we've been able to more easily reach more people. More people are coming to us. We set up pro bono meetings with psychiatrists. That's something we've been looking into. More people have come to us for that. Excuse me. But in some senses, it has become much tougher, because our earlier model was we'd rent out a venue, have an event, have a couple public speakers speak about their experiences, and then get everyone to do a reflection at the end. That was our format. But since going online, we can't really do that. There's no like physical venue which we can invite people to. It's all been online, which has been great because we can reach more people around different areas. But it's also been tougher because Zoom has a 40-minute limit. We don't have the kind of budget.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So that's been a little tough because we can't go to people and ask for help. We have to email them and they don't email back. So funding has been tight, and we've been trying to use different platforms and manage different things. So in that sense, it's been a little tough. But I think in a good way, the quarantine has made mental health a priority for a lot of people.
So as you know, your project reflects, we all kind of turn towards the arts when we feel low, right? So I think, how did that come into being? Like when you guys, had conversations about starting this project, how did you think of this medium, and not just like arts, but social media as like a platform to bring out your ideas and opinions?
So funny story about that. Initially, when we thought of this idea, we didn't actually think of it in the form that it is today. We just thought, oh, because we all do different creative arts. I play music and I do theater. Divya plays music. Minoli dances. Antara does like visual art. And we all thought, oh, let's come together and have like a fun collective event one day and invite people, and it'll be nice, and that'll be it. But then when we started brainstorming and putting ideas down, we realized that having it as a one-time thing would not really be fruitful. Just having a one-off event would not help anyone. It wouldn't help us for sure. So we thought maybe let's do it weekly, or let's do it monthly. Let's rent out a venue and have like a fun event every month. But then even that didn't seem right. Just us performing and asking people to watch us. Why should they watch us? Why are we only platforming ourselves? So then we brainstormed and we worked on more ideas. And in the end, we thought we need to be a platform that's a creative outlet for people who want to express their mental health journeys, because that's what it comes down to. The reason we're expressing ourselves is because, like societally, and especially in Indian culture, we've been told a little bit that we need to bottle up. That I'm sad all the time is boring, and it's rude and it's disrespectful to say that you're upset all the time when that's really how you're feeling. So instead of saying that, some people tend to express themselves through art, which is what we've been trying to encourage. Since open dialogue, in the sense of directly saying what you mean, is tough because sometimes you don't know what you mean, we've been trying to express that kind of dialogue through art, through creative means, since that's really the only way to know how you feel when sometimes you don't know yourself.
Okay, wow. I think I totally agree with you that it is possibly easier for some people to express themselves creatively rather than, having a one-on-one conversation. And speaking about that, that's one of the reasons we actually were so keen on inviting you for an episode. It's because we wanted to actually discuss the topic of men and mental health and how it actually affects men. And obviously, since none of us are men, we thought being such an open-minded guy, your perspective would be really, really important. And so all of us know there's a lot of stigma, a lot of stereotype inbuilt surrounding mental health, and society somehow put like a gender bias even on something like an illness, right? Because mental health is just that. It is, if you suffer from something, it is an illness. And so, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, exactly. That's something that I've kind of encountered when I've been doing PaperPlanes stuff with different people, talking to different people about it. They expect the other three to be part of it, but they're kind of surprised when I walk in the room. They're kind of wondering, why is this teenage guy being part of this mental health initiative? Shouldn't he just like man up and deal with his emotions in a different way? But that's really not constructive at all. Like, even our audience, we've noticed it's mainly female. um, our Instagram analytics is like 80% female, 20% male. So the people who are afraid to interact with mental health or be open about their mental health are more often than not men. And I've definitely experienced this for many years. I thought that um, if I told someone I was feeling vulnerable or I was feeling afraid of something, if I told someone that I kind of wanted to express that in a constructive way or a creative way, I was often told that that's not the best way to do it, that I need to deal with it on my own. It's an individual thing that I need to figure out and then be part of society. But that's not a great idea for men, because that can lead to long-term effects. We've seen that in clinical studies, bottling up your emotions can lead to physical effects such as hypertension, cardiac illness, and things like that. So telling someone to bottle it up, which more often than not happens to men, is extremely damaging to their entire their whole health, sort of, or their entire being. So saying that entirely invalidates them, and that's not a good idea. So as a man being part of this mental health initiative, my aim is to encourage other men to open up and be vulnerable and say what they're feeling, even if they feel like that's wrong or that they'll be considered less of a man.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because of like the stigmatization of mental health in general, I think in India, and especially in with like males, has been so, I think, systematic and generational. It's that much harder to get rid of those, and it's like so, and that makes it like so much harder to get rid of those biases. Like first of all, there's the entire idea that that if you're like feeling down or like if you have any kind of mental illness, it's just a phase, or like you want attention. And I think that's such a toxic mentality. And when I think especially like males show any kind of vulnerability, so many people see it as like something that takes away from their masculinity, which I think is such an indicator of toxic masculinity. Like, why is your masculinity so fragile that taking care of yourself takes away from it? And like also the expectation and stuff that someone needs to be strong all the time, that I don't know, quote, like men can't cry, is so unrealistic, and like having to live up to it when obviously I don't think people can, or even if they can, they should. It can so horribly damage and be like and negatively affect your mental health and even like your idea of self.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And I'm glad you brought up toxic masculinity, because that's something that's important to discuss. Because no one's born as a toxic male. Like, if you're born male and if you identify as male, you're not born with that toxic mindset. That's something that you gain over time. That's something that society makes you think is right. So if that idea is sort of transmitted or transferred through generations, like you said, it's hard to get rid of it. It's hard to just be like, yeah, I'm a man, I can be open, even though my grandfather and father and all my friends and all my teachers say that's wrong. I think it's right, so let me just do it. Because if everyone around you is saying it's wrong, then you can't express it to anyone around you. So that's the importance of a community, and that's where a community steps in. You need to find like-minded people. You need to find people who are okay with you being vulnerable, because that's the most important thing.
I think that's really, really important to talk about because, especially right now, I mean, like, I it's like if a guy is vulnerable and like shows his emotional side and things like that, then there are certain assumptions that are made about him and people question his masculinity and things like that. And I think that's just completely wrong. Like, why do you feel the need to do that? Like, expressing your emotions should not take away from your masculinity at all. And in fact, it's like completely normal, it's completely human. And I feel like we should really just normalize emotions and talking about how you feel, because I feel like that'll be healthier for people in the long run, because as you said, bottling up all of your emotions has a lot of other side effects apart from taking an emotional toll on you. But one question I want to ask you is like, what have you found that works? I mean, like, in your experience with like paper planes and maybe just like in general, what do you think is some things that like guys can do to sort of break down that toxic masculinity and become a little bit more open?
That's a great question. And, obviously, like we said, or like I said, we're not qualified to give out advice, but I can tell you what's worked for me. For me, in my experience, the thing that's worked is therapy is so important. Like, I think that everyone should see a therapist. Some people think that therapy is just for if you're suffering from a mental illness, for example, or if you suffer trauma or something like that. But in my opinion, I think everyone should go to therapy because everyone has some underlying things that they haven't talked about yet because they're too uncomfortable to talk about, or who would you even talk to them? Who do you even talk about them to? So I think that even if you can't afford therapy, there are pro bono therapists, there are hotlines. Just find a place where you can go and talk to someone and be anonymous and just vent everything that you have to say. Because in my experience, that's helped me a lot. Like, if there's something that's happened in my life that's affected me a lot, I'll just go somewhere, even on my notes app, I'll just write it down, this giant, thick paragraph, and I'll lock that note, and then that's it. I've said it, I've expressed it. I'll sometimes I'll write a poem about it. I'll make a collage or something that makes sure that that idea is out in the world. And once I've done that, that's all I can do.
When you're going through something, right, you should have someone to confide and to talk to. So as a, like, now that PaperPlanes has become nationwide, right now, how has the response, like, in this scenario been for you? Like, because you initially started off from Bangalore, right, and then you kind of expanded through to so many other cities around India. So that response, how has it kind of shaped your initiative and your opinion on mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, surprisingly, we were just planning to do it in Bangalore. It'll be like a small community initiative. And once we're done with it, we're done with it. Initially, we were like, we can't continue it after high school. This is just something that we're doing for ourselves. We can impact the community in our small way. But after lockdown, surprisingly, we've been able to impact so many more people. We noticed that a lot of our audience was coming from overseas even. We have a blog from the UK now. We have submissions coming in from there. And we noticed that a lot of our audience was starting to come from elsewhere, which is when we realized that creative expression for mental health is not a geographic thing, which is a dumb realization to have so late in the game. But we realized that it's not just important to have a small community in an area, because that's helpful in the short run, but in the long run, it's helpful to spread out. It's helpful to try and impact as many people as we can. That's been our goal. So in terms of the impact that we've had, it's been almost triple during lockdown. Our average audience on social media, we've received hundreds of submissions, and a lot more people have become interested in the work that we're doing. So that experience has been great for us, and it's definitely impacted our individual understandings of mental health, because when we started off, we just thought we're just four teenagers trying to do a small thing and try and make a small difference in Bangalore. But then in 12th grade, for example, two of us took up psychology, and studying that alongside conducting this initiative where we interacted with people on a daily basis. We texted people, we called people, people called us. Things like that and interacting with people on a daily basis made us feel like we'd created a home for people. It made us realize the importance of a community. Like I said before, it made us feel like belonging is more important than anything else. It's important to feel like when you say something, you will be heard, and if that's not there, then that can cause a lot of problems. Like we said, we discussed bottling up. That can be a side effect. But in our experience, it's been kind of great to talk to people and realize that we're an outlet for them to always be heard no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely think that speaking out and sharing your experiences, it's so important and needs to be normalized because mental illness is not something that, one can always avoid. It's not in their control. And, when we learn about in psychology and biology, we learn that there are evidence that there are actually chemical changes that take place in your body, right, which are associated with these illnesses, and there are genetic factors which are involved. And so, like I said, it's not something that one can control. It's not about your necessarily about your personal life, but it's about biology. And so I think once people realize that these are actual medical problems and that there are treatments available, I think then society really has there's a great scope and there's a lot of hope that can be involved.
Exactly. Like you said, there are genetic factors. There are obviously also environmental factors. Like if you suffered a huge trauma, that could be an effect, be a cause that could lead to the effect. Uh, which is why it's important to consider that someone who has been diagnosed with mental illness, it's a diagnosis, it's an illness, it's a real illness that people have. There's a clinical set of procedures, there's a treatment, there's a set route to recovery. But it's not like a thing that's made up in someone's brain. That's something we get a lot. It's all in your head, is something people say. It's a phase, it'll go away, which it might for some people, but it's not a universal experience that this is something that can be cured by uh, having a pill once a day and talking to a therapist. It's so much deeper than that, and that's something people fail to realize. It's not in anyone's control. Like I have a male cousin who was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, and his family was in denial about it for a long time. Like they wouldn't let him seek out medical help. They would kind of tell him to talk to them if he needed to, but that was all they would let him do. But eventually it got so bad that they had to let him seek help. And that's the point that we don't want to reach. We don't want to reach a point where it's like, oh, you have to go and talk to someone, or you have to go and seek medical help because it's gotten so bad. That's not the goal at all. The goal is prevention rather than cure.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think like just going along those lines of like your cousin, your male cousin that you just mentioned and things like that, I think in brown culture, again, this may be a really unhealthy generalization, but I think in brown culture in general, a lot of people just tend to brush everything aside. That like, okay, if you're feeling down right now, then it's just a phase, like everything's gonna move past. And everybody takes everything, not everything, but like people take most things really, really lightly, even like to an extent of like people will say, oh my god, I have OCD, like I'm a perfectionist, and like I have anxiety. Like it's not a character trait. And I feel like instead of just like throwing around those terms loosely, people should genuinely like get to understand what each of those issues are instead of just like associating themselves with one of it because like Billie Eilish does. Like I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
That's so true. That is so true. Like people use the R slur a lot, and with PaperPlanes, we've been working with a special needs school run by the Sampha Foundation, and when kids, we've met kids who have autism spectrum disorders. I know you have too, Sanjana, in your work with 1M1B.
Mm-hmm.
You've met kids like that, right?
Yep, I have.
So have we. Yeah, exactly. And using a slur like that is directly damaging to those kids. People fail to understand that. Saying something that's uh, trivializing these issues or romanticizing them, you are directly damaging people who have uh, those particular disorders or illnesses. You are creating tangible harm, and people fail to realize that. So that's something we've been trying to do as well, just raising awareness about not using terms like that so lightly.
Yeah, and I feel like one other thing that's really important too is that like, see, I will openly admit that like for a brief period of time, I as well used to use the R slur a lot. But after educating myself, I realized how detrimental it was to the set of people who are actually diagnosed, And I feel like it's okay. This is again super touchy, but I'm just gonna try to articulate this properly. You shouldn't really shame somebody for being uneducated about a matter. For example, if somebody uses one of those words and is not aware of the exact consequences, then you can't really like shame them. But if they are refusing to educate themselves, or even after educating themselves refusing to change their ways, then I think that's where you need to like step in a little bit. And I think that one thing that all of our listeners as well, I feel like even if you have used that word in the past or any other words that are like detrimental or like harmful to a certain community, then okay, you've used it in the past, but like, can you change? Can you become a better person? Can you evolve as a human being? Because okay, you used it once, fine. Instead of harping on that, I think we should move towards evolution instead of trying to like hide behind this like shield of perfection. Does that make sense?
I totally get that, and that kind of relates to cancel culture a little bit. That's where I
Mm.
see that coming in a bit.
Mhm.
Like when videos resurface of a famous person saying the N word, the reaction on Twitter and Instagram and everything is to be like, okay, this person is trash. Let's just not support them ever again. And that's not a fair reaction, because while what they said is disgusting and while they should definitely not have said that, it's important to consider things like, did they know the detrimental impacts of those words? Did they know that those words could negatively impact someone? When we're talking about famous people who say slurs, if they continue to do it in the modern day when that information is so widely available, then I think it's fair to say that they haven't evolved. If people have tried to educate them over and over again, like you said, Sanjana, it's fair to say that they haven't evolved. But if they don't know the impact of their words, if they're like 11 years old on Minecraft saying whatever they feel like is funny, then it's your duty to educate them. And once you have, it's their duty to take that information on and, like you said, become better. So I think that's also important.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people are uneducated. A lot of people say a lot of things that they don't mean the actual implication behind them, but they just say it just to say it because whatever their friends and the people close to them have taught them that it's cool. And I think one of the major ways in which we can solve this itself and like making sure that people are more educated from a young age and they don't have to make the mistake to have someone correct them is by like kind of taking care of the problem at a more grassroots level. Because what I've seen, like how Armaan, you spoke about your cousin and parents, like I think the parents themselves need to educate their children on like slurs, on things like that, and like quote unquote like what it means to be woke. And I think one of the main things in Indian culture that we need to teach the younger people is that emotion and like vulnerability isn't gendered. It's a general thing. Like if you feel something, express it. If you think something is right, say it. Like stand up for yourself and what you believe in, and don't stand up to your friends who might say the wrong thing.
Yeah. So when we're talking about Indian culture, we've talked about the downsides of Indian culture with respect to mental health, but it's also important to talk about the plus sides. For example, like I'm sure Risha knows, Indian culture is collectivistic. So we're all a group together. We have a group mentality. Our main priority is to benefit everyone. And so for that reason, when someone comes out with something serious, like um, I knew a person who came out with depression, who was diagnosed with clinical depression, and when she came out with that, her entire community rallied together. It was a low income community in a rural area. They rallied together to raise the funds and get her a therapist when she came out with that. Her father recently passed away, and she'd been spending all her time alone, without talking to people, being lonely, things like that. The entire community rallied together and came together. So I think it's important to discuss that although Indian culture can improve in many ways, we're already there. We're already thinking about each other. We're already being kind to each other. And the important thing is just to continue that.
I 100% agree with that. I think having support systems are so, so important. And like, dude, brown people, we flock together, and I feel like because we already have like that network of support and everything, what's important is that we just build on that. And like I said before, I think all of us should just evolve as people. It's a continuous process. Nobody is ever perfect at any given point of time, and I think we should continue to just strive for evolution. I think that's really important. But on that note, we're going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much, Armaan, for joining us on the podcast. For all of our listeners, we will be linking Armaan's project and his Instagram handle, all of his social media, all of that jazz. We'll be linking it in the description of this. Or if you're listening to this on Spotify, just click on the show notes and you'll find everything as well. If any of you guys want somebody to open up to, I'm pretty sure that PaperPlanes has the right resources for you. Please do not feel threatened by this entire idea of mental health. Please do not feel that it's some huge thing that you'll never be able to understand and things like that. It's baby steps, and I think if you start taking those steps, you will eventually be on the road to becoming a better and healthier version of yourself. So yeah, I think that's that. Thank you so much, Armaan, for coming on our podcast.